Welcome to the Commerce Talks podcast, episode number 47. You might have seen that it's not Wimlex anymore because we just found a new name from the Wimlex team. Only I'm left and Lina also is left. Wilhelm left the debt agency and they're focusing on his new fund. That was the reason why we've decided to give us a new name. Now it's Commerce Talks, and we will publish now weekly episodes, hopefully, with our new regular guest, Andrej. So Andrej is here today as he joined Spryker only a couple of days ago in our US team. And he has a tremendous experience in the commerce industry with Intershop and Elastic Path. He was heading the Intershop business for over a decade in the US. As we are now starting with the US business with Spryker, that is a very, very valuable addition to our team. And he is most likely the most valuable addition to the former Wimlex team, now Commerce Talks team. So welcome, Andrej, and we will give him some minutes to introduce himself, give him some room, and then we will dive into the following questions. What was the Intershop story from a US perspective over the last 2 decades? What has he learned when it comes to the different vendors in the US market that might pretty much differ from our view in Europe when it comes to commerce vendors? And then we're going to talk about an article from Seeking Alpha where this article was titled Shopify, the best operating system for commerce. And I have a big question mark here, but we will come to that later. So Andrej, tell please our new listeners and old listeners who you are and what you're doing for us right now.
Thank you, Alex. I'm really excited to join the Spryker team here in the US. Obviously, there's a great growth trajectory going on with the extension of Spryker into the US. I just recently started, basically last week, as the VP US Go-to-Market and Industry Solutions. And hopefully I can contribute in that role in various facets to, gaining footprint here in the US, extending market share, and gaining some good traction in North America. A little bit about myself. I have been in the e-commerce space for over 24 years now, actually. So since 97, that's when I joined Intershop originally. I was fortunate to really gain experience in all different facets of the e-commerce market, from leading large implementations across the globe, including projects like Hewlett-Packard, Sun Microsystems, the Otto Group, and so on. I was appointed to lead next generation product development for Intershop, which basically led to our Intershop 7 product on the Intershop side, and at the same time to the GSI Commerce V11 program back in the day. And since I always had a big interest on bridging really the product side in the market, I was also building product marketing and strategy out for Intershop to really bring the market experience, the market trends into the product and the product development, especially when we saw a big change in the market with mobile becoming very, very popular, and the customer exchange really moving towards new devices and so on. And then really in the past few years at Intershop, before joining Elastic Path, I shifted focus to really the US side in various roles, gaining traction on the partner side, finding and building strategic alliances, primarily on the solution partner side, helping sales and supporting the sales side, and gaining large customers like Dover Corporation, Denmark Corporation, etc. So it was really exciting from that perspective, but at a certain point, it was time to leave the nest, so to speak, and really experience some other vendors. And so I was fortunate enough to join Elastic Path, which is a little bit newer player, went through various facets, but is in its nature also pure headless commerce vendor. I joined as a VP Industry Solutions to bring primarily the B2B market expertise into the various parts of the organization, to help the product team, to help the go-to-market team, to help the alliances team and so on. And, now I'm again glad to join Spryker, in this new endeavor.
So what I hear here is that maybe our paths have crossed when you have implemented Intershop at the Otto Group. Though I didn't know that actually, or when you had Otto Group with Intershop. So when was that? That must be like the early 2000s when Otto Group entered the Intershop train.
That is correct. So that was probably around 2000, 2001. I'm not 100% sure, but I spent some time in Hamburg, spent some time with the team there, and obviously it was one of the largest clients that we had at the time at Intershop.
And how do you see a progress of those clients? Because we have a very popular PowerPoint slide where we tell a little bit about the different e-commerce generations. And when Otto started with e-commerce in the early 2000s or in the late 90s, and then entered the Intershop technology train in the early 2000s, so e-commerce was not as big as it is today, obviously, at the Otto Group. So mail order was like 99% of the business, and e-commerce in the early 2000s might have been like 10, 20 million, whatever. When I joined the Otto Group in 2005, 2006, it was already a couple of 100 millions euro in revenue, and there was already like this permanent blaming going on. Yeah, so we cannot update fast enough. There's now newer players coming around. I think 2006 was a time when Magento really entered the market, and like new online shops were starting everywhere. And then all of a sudden people are asking, hey, why does it take so long with Intershop updating a website? So why it's so complex? And then only 2 or 3 years later, in 2009, kind of Zalando showed the market how it works. And I think there was like a time between 2005 and 2010 where like there was constantly blaming. In 2011, 2012, Otto tried to switch to its own front-end framework, so to say, to get a little bit more independent. But you have been there like from the beginning, and we both know there's no single truth. It's not just the system. It's not because of SAP. It's not because of there's not enough competence. So was it really so hard for these older customers like Otto to switch into a new system? So what was your experience? So when you integrated Intershop over there, was there kind of a big wow moment, a big like lots of people cheering about entering a new technology track? So what was it? Because when I entered, the blaming was already around. So that would be very interesting to understand from your perspective.
So, I mean, it has been quite a while. So I'm not sure if I recollect every single thing correctly, but obviously there were different aspects of the Otto Group. So there was Otto itself, which was by far the largest part, right? Which was traditional catalog provider. So you got your big fat catalogs every, season, and you typically ordered from there. And then you had Otto has quite a number of subsidiaries, right? Like Bauer, like Sportcheck, I think is one of those, right? And a bunch of others. And I think there's always politics involved. I mean, you know it probably as well, that when management changes, they have their own ideas, they have their own relationships, and things might change. Now, when we started the relationship with Otto Group, e-commerce was what it was back in the day. It was basically a monolithic application. It was a full suite of the different components that you need to run basically your online business from a really digital commerce perspective. Like you had your product information management, you had a transactional engine, you had your pricing promotion engine, your checkout processes, and so on. And obviously the customer experience very much interwoven with the entire stack. I mean, those are the times before even mobile was a topic, right? It was before the iPhone was even released. So everything was built as a full stack solution. Now, Intershop is and was an enterprise solution. So, we served, more complex customers quite well. And we had the possibility to customize the systems any way you want. Now, with those customizations, of course, come the challenges of upgrades. I think technology evolved tremendously since those days in context of, API structures, architectural concepts, and so on. So it's really hard to compare what we see today and when we talk about composable commerce and API first versus back in the days where everything was basically, again, built as a monolith. So with that, I mean, every single vendor that we saw in the market had the same upgrade challenges, in my opinion. I think Demandware was the first one that took the Intershop platform and tried to build, and build a multi-tenant SaaS environment that tried to address it. But with those came some limitations on the customizability stuff. I think what has been done quite well was that, Intershop built this concept of the pyramid, which means we have a foundation and different layers of the application that could be leveraged by all the different brands of Otto. And then you had customizations on top specifically for that brand, right? And their specific processes. You would try to inherit as much as you could from the core Intershop platform. Then on top you had a core Otto group platform, so to speak. And then you had the different variations and customizations for each individual brand. Now, Otto was really ambitious in differentiating. They need to stay competitive in the market as a big player. I think they were number 2 in the retail space globally. And basically did an evaluation, as far as I remember, to build a homegrown solution in order to fulfill all their specific needs versus building on top of of an existing platform. And I think that's where some of the political discussions came into play. And eventually Otto Group, as far as I understand, moved to do a homegrown solution and a custom solution. While actually all the other brands stand on the Intershop platform.
Yeah, that's even true today. So some brands are sold already. So Sportcheck is not a part of the Otto Group anymore. Though there was a big change, but it's like, you entered it like 20 years ago. Obviously there had been big changes. And to be honest, so it was the most successful mail order retailer. So at least they are still existent, other than like Quelle or Neckermann, who went bankrupt, and the brand was then acquired by Otto. But when you entered, I think the US market for Intershop in the late 2008, 2009 or so.
Beginning up.
So can you tell us a little bit more about this experience? So when you entered this market, so which players were around? What was the competitive landscape? Because if you're looking to Gartner's Magic Quadrant today, that was like very different 10 years ago. So can you tell us if customers were just awaiting the Intershop train in the US, or and what actually did they use before?
So I moved beginning of 2004, is when I specifically moved to the US. And I think we saw a few market changes there. We were still kind of at the end of the, market crash, after the new economy bubble burst, in 2001. So I think, the industry, still struggled, and had challenges. Some of the vendors suddenly disappeared. That was still the time frame where, we had the broad visions, the blue martinis, and they didn't exist anymore, basically. It's actually a good question to recall the vendors right at that time, right at that year is probably tough, and I probably would have to have another look. But, you had the main vendors, I think, in the enterprise space around Oracle and ADG, IBM. I think Hypers, I would have to look, was just maybe at the beginning here. That was probably before the acquisition, or the joining with iCongo. And then a bunch of other smaller players as well. So it was kind of not, it was in a transition to a certain extent. And we still saw a lot of replacement of homegrown solutions with customers. and customers just starting in the space, to a large extent. But I also remember, when you look at the late 90s and 2000s, the telco space had a certain boom, with, the internet becoming more and more popular and the websites in general and kind of just hosting sites, right? Even for many companies and folks, e-commerce was the next step, which was still a big step for a lot of those companies. And the telco space actually back in the day, similar to a certain extent to some of the vendors now, tried to provide these entry-level solutions. So we saw companies providing solutions like e-pages, telcos like providing these one-on-one, I think was one of those, where you pay a certain small monthly fee, but you can set up a templatized store, and so on. And then you had obviously, the large customers with their custom solution.
You then joined Elastic Path in 2019. So what was the landscape looking then in 2019? So who were the strong players in the US? What was the perspective of chief digital officer in the US when he was looking out for new vendor solutions, for new software solutions in the e-commerce space?
So I think, if you look at really how the digital commerce market evolved, we talked about the very early days. They were like, you had really these licensed package software solutions, right? The monoliths, how we call them today at least, or you had your DIY solutions. We saw then the change, it was probably around 2006 when it started. And it was driven a lot by Demandware and followed by some of the other vendors. When we moved from a licensed software offering to kind of SaaS platforms. And, so that was trend going on, for a good decade there. Before we saw yet another trend where the whole SaaS platform offering evolved into SaaS headless and microservices. So by the time I basically moved, or if you take 2019, I think we had three main buckets, I would say. So you had your more traditional, monolithic, so to speak, e-commerce solutions, like more of the Hybris, the Intershop, the IBM, and so on one hand. On the other hand, you had some of the more templated or cookie cutter solutions, like a Shopify, for instance, more of a big commerce, even though some of those are evolving. And then the third one, with the on a new architecture based on APIs, headless was a big common term here. And then even a step further with the evolvement of a microservices page to pro modular platform. So we had all three had their advantages and disadvantage. And I think we got to a point where, the market is going through that change and companies, got confused on what is right for them, and it's hard to distinguish what the benefits are, I think, at that time. And now we see more and more, I think, the evolvement of, headless microservices, cloud, API first, type of architectures in the space.
And what is your assessment on like the older vendors? So we have all the newer vendors also active in the US, like a VTEX, like Miracle, for example, like Elastic Path is one of the first that went on the headless train. So compared to the incumbents, so the Demandware, which is now Salesforce Commerce, Intershop, Hybris is still around in the US. So if you would ask modern CDO in a US organization today, how would he or she perceive the market? Does he really distinguish in those two kind of buckets and say, okay, old vendors versus new vendors, or is it a little bit more faceted?
Yeah, probably not. I mean, what we have seen, first of all, I think we have a pretty broad spectrum of vendors today, in my opinion. So we see still, some of the traditional well-established vendors as well as up-and-coming players, like VTEX that you mentioned, Elastic Path, and with the changes that happened within the past, couple of years, and so on. And I think it depends a little bit who the decision makers are on the practitioner side. So if you have the IT team that is driving decision, many of those, they are looking into microservices. If it's the business side of things, they don't really care as much as long as the business challenges are being addressed, as long as they get the business value. Because if they don't have to deal with the IT side of things, the infrastructure deployment, what have you, and let's say the price is right, then that's all they care about, right? They want to get their system up and running. They want to solve for their challenges. They want to provide the right customer experience, and then hopefully they are thinking ahead and have the options and the possibilities to extend from there and grow from there.
Okay, so but I got it. Like the business side is not interested at all. So yes, they are interested like sometimes in fluffy stuff, and they are reading articles which we are talking about in a minute. But eventually they don't care. I agree. But from a tech perspective, so we have in German we have the so-called EDV Leiter. So the one who was actually heading the IT, but not as a CTO, which we would call him today, but rather the one who is responsible for the internal network stability, maybe for setting up the ERP system and handling the ERP system. So do you see still a lot of EDV Leiter kind of types in the US, or was it never there?
We do see the IT side. And again, it depends a little bit on the industry and the type of company. On the B2B side of things, and for instance, in industries that providing more regulated products, or that need to own kind of their environment infrastructure, let's say like life sciences as an example, government, IT departments are heavily involved, and the IT side is important for various reasons. For other companies, again, they couldn't care less as long as they can accomplish their business tasks. So for me, when it comes to some of those topics, I think we on the vendor side understand benefits, differentiations. I'm not so sure that really the practitioners always understand it, even if they are interested in microservices, because at least from my perspective, my multi-tenant SaaS as an example, and what it stands for is the easy upgrade path. We talked about it before, right? It was hard in the past. It was really costly. It was time consuming to run those upgrades. Multi-tenant SaaS basically indicates you run on one code base, all the clients. You consume upgrades, without any downtime. So it's the value can be provided constantly. Now, at the end, it shouldn't matter if it's at the end multi-tenant SaaS and you get seamless upgrade, or if it's a single tenant, for instance, or if it's an on-premise installation as an example, right? But I think the value that companies want is a seamless upgradability, and they translate it into something else, which kind of goes in hand, but doesn't have to be. So I don't know if it makes sense from that perspective. And the same applies, with other parts of the technology. I think there are certain benefits for the vendor side to handle it more effectively, differently. I'm not sure if it always necessarily translates into business benefits.
Okay, so there were one discussions we are usually having with industry peers from the vendor industry is that we are living in an industry where it's a lot about bragging. So people say, yeah, we are Macht technology, we are microservice, API based, headless, and if you're going to a traditional trade fair, then out of a sudden everybody is saying, yeah, we are Macht too, we are headless too, we are cloud first too, there are even companies claiming they are cloud native, which is most likely one of the stupidest things you can say today. So in this kind of industry environment, it's very hard for customers, or as you say, practitioners to identify the perfect partners. And it's the same, not only for the vendors, it's the same for the agencies. So the SIs, depending what you will ask them, they will always say, yes, that's our core competence. We always build AI-powered chatbots. Yeah, we always build like responsive websites. They would even claim projects from the past, like the Auto Group, for example, and say, yeah, this was responsive too. So, what is though in the DACH market, the European market, the big analyst houses like Gartner and Forrester, they are not a very popular source here. They are relevant, but they're not as popular as in the US. So, do you think that Gartner Forrester can effectively guide through this kind of bullshit bingo forest to find the right vendor, the right partner, the right agency, the right third party integration? So it's not limited to commerce vendors. So it's essentially every part of our industry is claiming that they can do it all. So even the content management system providers would say, yeah, we are headless too. We are native headless even, and we can totally add like a commerce functionality because it's just adding a basket. The content is there. You only need to add a basket. So what do you think is like the best way today, especially in the US, to navigate through this? So can Gartner still help? Are analysts from Gartner, Forrester, are they deep enough into technology to understand what's going on?
So I think so. I mean, Gartner and Forrester are, great resources, and they're very popular resources, especially here in the US. I think most of the enterprise practitioners, they have one way or another a relationship with some of the big analyst firms. And, Forrester and Gartner as an example, they put a lot of effort into building those relationships on the vendor side. I mean, their big business is obviously helping practitioners. I mean, we as a vendor have to understand that that's the core business for them, is really helping them, guiding them, and helping them navigate through exactly that, and understanding for that specific industry, for those specific use cases, that type of an application, what are vendors they should be looking at. Now, typically, the analysts don't make a decision for the practitioners, but they really guide them, right? And really give them, options to look at, based on the evaluations, etc. So both companies, in this example, and there are others like IDC, they do evaluations almost yearly, around the vendor space. And it's a great effort on their side, They not only, talk to these companies, they have the strategic briefings to understand really what the vision is for the specific vendors, how they see the market, how they adapt to the market, how they serve the market. They see the product firsthand by having product demos. They typically have extensive questionnaires, and they verify a lot of what has been said with customer references. So I think they are getting a pretty all-around picture. Now, is that picture perfect? And can you prepare for a lot of those items? Yes, of course. But I think they do a pretty decent job in order to understand the market and the nuances of the different vendors and help guide those help the practitioners in guiding.
So and maybe one last question to understand the US market a little bit better before we are digging into an interesting article from Seeking Alpha. So before the crisis, have been the big trade shows like we knew in Germany, especially with the Demexco and maybe one former example might have been Cebit. So was that the same in the US where you met new vendors and customers on trade shows? Now everything is new, but just from my understanding, so was there like a big kind of Demexco in the US where all the B2B and B2B businesses sent their experts to understand what's going on the vendor side?
Yeah, I mean, we had quite a few events for different parts of the industry. So we had NRF as an example, more for the retail space, which was typically beginning of the year, was kind of the kickoff of the year in New York. We had IRC as a different retail event, big one in the middle of the year. And then certain specific B2B events like B2B Online and B2B Next. And those trade shows, help again to expose, the vendor landscape, have a big exchange between the practitioners. I think that's the most important part of those shows, is really have the practitioners go out there, see what is new, how the market evolved, talk to some of the new vendors, some of the old vendors, do some comparison. But first and foremost, also have the peer exchange, which I think is super critical in this industry, to kind of really exchange what have worked for one company, what have worked for other companies, how did they solve for certain challenges that companies are facing. So I think what we have seen over the past few years is that there is a more open exchange between practitioners, and between, the responsible folks on the digital side, to really, gain expertise and leverage experience from other companies.
Okay, got it. Then let's maybe deep dive into one article where a not yet practitioner wrote about his view on who might become the next operating system. The article actually stuck out because we are calling our product operating system, and we have a very different understanding, obviously, from what the author is thinking. So the article is titled "Shopify: The Best Operating System for Commerce." And he's claiming a couple of things which I think we have to discuss. So the one thing he was claiming is, and he is using Red Bull as an example. So he said that Red Bull was the bellwether that shows competitors and merchants that big brands don't necessarily need expensive enterprise software. So he was talking about an online shop project with Red Bull and Shopify. He said the enterprise software market is rigged. So usually if you pay for a Ferrari, you're getting a Ferrari. It's very different in the enterprise market. So customers pay millions more and get a software which is much worse. So he's comparing SAP Hybris, Demandware Commerce, IBM WebSphere, now HCL, with Shopify. Then he said, legacy enterprise software can be thought of as a mafia of companies and consulting firms. So we will deep dive into that in a minute. So he would still question, so what kind of company can afford today to buy an HCL solution, the old WebSphere solution? So that can be only because somebody was bribed. And then he said, it's just good enough to have a front end technology like Shopify that makes you flexible to show your brand everywhere. So he's obviously very much discussing the B2C perspective, and maybe before we are diving in. So the one thing which he has right, which is also part of this PowerPoint slide, and we'll share it in our show notes, which we're usually saying the e-commerce market, the software market, was democratized over the last decade. So it was a very exclusive thing to have like an e-commerce technology in the late 90s. That was actually when ATG or WebSphere were the big players. Then it was democratized a little bit by Intershop and Hybris, and maybe the first versions of Demandware for the bigger companies. And Magento entered the market, Shopware entered the market, and eventually it became cheap and doable by everybody with technologies like Shopify or Jimdo in Germany or ePages. So it's true, a problem that was very expensive to solve 20 years ago is now very easy to solve. So that I think is correct. But what I would say is the problem evolved pretty much. So the case to just put an online shop in front of the customer, that is the minor use case anymore for the bigger brands. But let's park this kind of assumption for a minute. So when you are listening to the claim, Shopify, the standard SaaS technology for rather smaller businesses, is a good operating system for enterprise companies. So what comes to mind? So what do you think? Is there anything that any immediate reaction?
Yeah, I think we have to really distinguish, who those companies are and where they are, from a maturity perspective, architectural requirements, uniqueness in their business, how many channels or sites they want to support, and so on and so on. So I think you're absolutely correct. I think it's primarily driven under, in the retail space. And I think, a lot of those references apply, on the retail side. What Shopify has done really, really well, is to provide merchants an end-to-end solution that they can easily stand up, and get going, they can basically upload their information, they can use different templates, for the front-end experience, as an example, set up all the different business data and, have transactions going through the environment. So if you're focusing on that fast time to market to test certain things, I think it's definitely, a choice and an option in the market. If you look at Red Bull as an example, they're basically kind of, in manufacturing space in general, we have to distinguish, what part of the business it is that they run on Shopify, in my opinion. So, if you talk about a brand manufacturer as an example that now want to go direct to consumer, especially, with the pandemic that we had and, some of the disruptions in, the distribution channels, getting direct access to customers and so on, they needed to react. They needed to test certain things. And I think Shopify is certainly a platform that allows them to do exactly that. Quickly test a direct to consumer channel, for example, where they, again, provide a subset of products. They manage some of their standard pricing and they get transaction going. I don't necessarily think and agree that channel will be the long-term solution for manufacturers, because the way they run the overall business and the complexity of the overall channel structure, it just cannot be solved on Shopify. So again, you have to differentiate which part of the business can be done and how complex your business is overall if you run, your line of business through Shopify. And that's why we see Shopify primarily targeting still, the SMB and mid-market, and then obviously you have Shopify Plus with some extended functionality and APIs that you can leverage for, some custom storefronts, for instance, that are going a little bit upmarket.
Okay, so then let's state for a minute, or maybe as an intermediate result. So his claim that bigger brands don't necessarily need enterprise software in the B2C space, in the retail space, to create a brand experience for the customer. That's partly true. So whenever there's an idea at the Red Bull team saying, okay, I'd like to sell liquid XYZ to under a certain Red Bull brand, let's call it like Red Bull Black, in the Austrian market. So Shopify could be a choice where 10 years ago there was only an Intershop or Hybris, for example, that could solve this kind of requirement. That's true. So we can give him that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have a fairly straightforward store channel that you wanna serve, I think it's definitely an option. If you wanna leverage those even mobile optimized storefront templates, if you wanna test some social shopping connectors out, if you wanna leverage some of the POS capability that Shopify now provides, I think it's definitely an option. Now, if you look at, more complex or into aggressive growth or supporting a variety of channels and business models, if you want to go international and you want to differentiate, and I think that's a big piece, an important piece is like for a lot of those companies is how do you differentiate now in the market, right? How can you serve your customers better? How you create this customer stickiness? And I think a template solution will not cut it in the long term. So I think you have to build, to provide that uniqueness, and you have to be able to adapt easily to changing business and technology environments, and that might be a little bit harder to do with a more templated solution.
Okay, agree. Then let's go to claim number 2. So customers software customers are pay millions, and the software is getting worse. So he's saying, so you're getting more and more like an old Toyota Camry, but paying for a Ferrari. This is a claim I usually get a lot when it's about enterprise software, and it's not only against enterprise software, it's usually also against like the agency setup. It's not the software is getting more expensive. Agency takes longer to implement new changes. So why is that? So is this claim true? Do customers with enterprise software really get a shitty experience for lots of money, or what is the real truth behind that?
I think it's part is reflected on the history. And again, we talked about it before, like how we go through a transition in the market, on the technology side as well as on the, practitioner side with the raised customer experience and so on. And so if you talk about, some of the larger companies with 3 letters and some others, I think it was an experience, they were expensive. You not buy only the e-commerce piece, you to a certain extent, you had to buy into the ecosystem, and it was expensive. And then, I think the same author, references how e-commerce became, not necessarily priority for some of those companies anymore because they are focused on some other components of their offering. And that's probably also true. So they don't get the same value over the years, while they still pay a lot of money for the upkeep, the maintenance, the customization, and so on. And for some of those more traditional, monolithic companies, it still holds true that the upgrade path is still not easy. Now, I think there's risk to comparing those type of vendors and offerings with, some of the other buckets that we discussed before, like that we see in the market that are modular, that are microservices based, that are API first, headless, and so on, that allow you for way more flexibility, agility, and compose your environment to your specific needs.
So I would try to sum it up the following way. So you would say, it might be true, like for very old installations. So when you kind of missed the upgrade path with Intershop or Hypers or whatever, then you might be paying millions now for not getting any value. But if you're like on a modern headless first technology like Spryker, it might be more expensive than Shopify, but gives you like the freedom enterprise companies would need. And therefore, yes, you pay more, but you're getting more. But there's some duties on the customer side. That's what you're saying. So you just cannot leave the system alone, but you need to actively manage the upgrade path, the capability, the third-party integration. So it's not maintaining itself.
Absolutely.
Correct?
And I think it's important to also understand the cost of the e-commerce platform or the e-commerce solution is not the only factor. If I pay more for a different vendor or a different solution, and I increase my revenue, I decrease my costs, and so on. I think those numbers have to be looked at as well. So I think it's hard to compare that because you have to look at the outcome as well, not just at the cost factor, the operational cost and so on.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Then let's go to his third claim. Legacy enterprise software can be thought of as a mafia of companies and consulting firms. So he's obviously referencing to why is it still possible that HCL software, like now a company owned, I think by an Indian mother company, why is it still possible they are in the market? They are not headless. They are not API based. They obviously don't have a microservice infrastructure under the hood, but still they do win customers. They win implementation. And his claim here is that is only because there's kind of a mafia structure around that is helping HCL to win customers. So is that true?
I'm not sure that anybody is holding a pistol on your head to kind of choose HCL or IBM. So no, there might be other dependencies, but so I think it's a little bit exaggerating. And I think what is true is that a lot of companies facing dependencies because they bought an ecosystem, and for them it's really hard and expensive to detangle that, and kind of make a move into into a different solution or a different platform. You also have to keep in mind, if you do implementations with some of the large SIs, they're all there for the money. Those implementations are typically seven or eight figures, looking at, the obviously more than just e-commerce, digital transformation. But that's where maybe some of the reflection comes from. I think is the dependency into an ecosystem that you have created, that you bought into, that is hard to basically get out of. Like we see a lot of companies that had an SAP on the ERP side. They bought e-commerce, with Hybris, the same on the Salesforce side or IBM. And that makes it really tough to pick best of breed components and to integrate into your ecosystem.
Okay, so you're essentially saying it's true. There's like people with a high self-interest in like earning money for earning implementation days, for example, or selling implementation days, or a vendor would say, if there's a customer's paying $1 million every year and not complaining, so why should I charge less? But again, here on the customer side, there's a lot of potential to change this kind of situation.
Yet.
Nobody would pull out a pistol, as you say.
Well, I think, companies, they face a challenge. So let's say, companies have implemented an IBM for the past 5 years and it's supporting their digital business today. Now they know they are facing certain limitations. Maybe they cannot grow in certain areas. Now it's a hard decision to be made. Are we paying for the cost to upkeep the system, for the expensive customizations, for certain expense on upgrade paths, or am I going through a large re-implementation, re-platforming project, right? And I think a lot of companies, a lot of folks, they're struggling with that decision, and they just keep going because they don't want to undertake the big replacement. And I think what we will see is with the more modular platforms, the microservices approach, and like Spryker uses, we use package capabilities and again, very modular approach. I think we see more of a strangler pattern moving forward, where companies get an opportunity to incorporate certain single components and then basically grow the business from within, and then basically step by step replace it instead of doing a big bang re-platforming project. And I think that's where we see a big shift.
Yeah. I agree. Now let's maybe deep dive in one or two other claims the author made on his Seeking Alpha article, and then I think we're running out of time, so we're almost close to an hour now in recording time. So one claim he has is Shopify has a brighter future than on-premise Magento. So he's actually using the Magento example because Magento was recently acquired by Adobe for $2.6 billion. So, but I don't recall 100%, but I think it was in that area. And then he referred to the on-premise part of Magento, which he said leads to higher upfront costs, difficult to maintain, upgrade and scale, very challenging for the vendor like Magento to gather information on the usage on the customer side. So is this true, though? Is on-premise dead?
I think on-prem in a traditional way is probably dead. I mean, what we see is a differentiation between multi-tenant SaaS, which is obviously a big trend, and we have seen it in retail, and we see that more and more up and coming in other areas as well. But we'll also see, that single tenant is there to stay. Now a lot of those companies are moving to the cloud. Cloud was an issue before because of perceived data security challenges or issues. But I think companies now realize the benefits of cloud. So we'll see that. So I don't think companies are building and maintaining their own infrastructure and installing the software side on their side and maintain it in-house. I think that is not the case. They might be still managing it to a certain extent, companies that want to have it in-house and control it, but in cloud environments, be it like in AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, and so on. So if you take the term on-premise in a traditional way that is within your own hosting centers, then probably those times are gone by now.
Yeah. Okay, got it. And the last claim he's doing he was making is that Big Commerce, another very big vendor focusing on SMBs in the US market, I just IPO'd, I think, half a year ago. They're not able to catch up with the Shopify numbers. There only can be one ecosystem per sector. So for the SMB sector, SaaS, e-commerce shops, there can be only one winner, which is Shopify. So Big Commerce won't do it. So do you see it the same? So you're a little bit closer in the US market. You might have seen Big Commerce even as a competitive vendor in cases where you have pitched with Elastic Pass. So is there no chance for Big Commerce to catch up with Shopify, or do you see it a little bit more differentiated?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit hard to say. Maybe, I mean, both are successful companies. Obviously, he claims and he shows the numbers like in the increase of the customer base and the GMV that's running through the platform. And yeah, to be honest, just looking purely on those numbers, Shopify made a tremendous growth in the past year specifically. Now, nevertheless, I think there is a place for big commerce. And I don't know that I would say that there's going to be one winner versus the other. I think there's going to be a differentiation happening. There's going to be a positioning. Companies will provide certain values in specific areas, in specific industries. And company will adapt their offering to differentiate. So, I don't, you cannot see that black and white, I would say.
Okay, but there's some part of this claim might be true. So it's number-wise, it seems to be very hard for Big Commerce to catch up.
I think what Shopify does really well is, again, providing for the merchant a great end-to-end solution with an easy button. And they do that, I think, right now for especially retail or parts of direct-to-consumer business. They do that really well.
Okay, cool. Thanks. That's it for like a first episode. Sensational. We will deep dive into the next episodes a little bit more into the US market, talking about curbside pickup, the tremendous success maybe of HelloFresh, and one or two very interesting research documents from the Gartner colleagues about composable commerce. But that's something we're going to talk about next week. So Andrej, for our first episode together, big thank you. And see you next week.
Thank you, Alex.